This past Wednesday, GT7 has come out with a brand new update, and while I'm not the first YouTuber to get videos out for this update, I have taken the time to get these setups perfect for you guys so you guys can enjoy the new cars and get the absolute most out of them. Obviously right now everybody's caught up in the Spec III update announcement that's coming in December, and that's for good reason because that update easily looks like the best update we've had in years for Gran Turismo 7. And while the 1.63 update hasn't wowed me necessarily, now that I've driven some of the new cars, there's been some pleasant surprises, some surprising disappointments, and one new engine swap in particular which could absolutely shift the meta of the game. So without further ado, let's get right into the cars. So the first two cars I want to touch on briefly are the two cars in this update that you cannot modify or tune. The Opel Corsa VGT was going to obviously be the least surprising disappointment of the group. And while the Opel has some good characteristics, like a much higher downforce level than I was initially expecting, it is once again just a VGT car. And if I were to compare the performance to anything currently in Gran Turismo 7, it's about the same pace as some of the 2008 GR2 cars. But yeah, decent cornering, pretty underwhelming top speed for what it is, but the Mazda Racing Roadster, however, I was actually kind of excited for, given that this is going to be the higher performance version of the Miata. However, upon entering GT7, I quickly realized that this car is unmodifiable, very similar to a VGT car. You can add some aero bits to increase your downforce levels, which is nice, but power, suspension, differential, you name it, you can't change anything about this car. And as a result, on track, the car feels very sloppy. I know a lot of people say like, oh, well, if you're going to tune a Miata and make it really stiff and give it a lot of horsepower, that you're totally missing the point. But if you wanted to do a Miata Cup type race, there's already plenty of Miatas in the game for that, so why would anybody ever use this one over the other ones? It's a very confusing addition to the game, and you could actually argue that it's even more useless than the Opel VGT car. The first car in this update with setup and upgrade potential is the Hyundai Elantra N. Now, when Kaz dropped the silhouettes for this update, I was hoping that this car would be the highlight of the update, and while after driving it I do think it has some positive characteristics, I would say overall it's a bit of a disappointment. Now, the first thing I want to note is you want to make sure to not install the high lift camshafts on this car if you plan on fully upgrading it. For whatever reason, the high lift camshafts actually lower the horsepower on this car. I'm not sure if that's a bug or if that was intended by the developers. I have to imagine it's a bug, but regardless, make sure to not install the high lift camshafts at all costs. If you've already done this by accident, getting a new rebuild for the engine is actually not very expensive, so you can go do that and upgrade the car again to get the full 634 horsepower. With that being said, I don't know if you want the full 634 horsepower because this car suffers from major traction issues even for an FF car. Now, I know what everybody's going to say to me, it's an FF car, why are you giving it this much power, you're missing the point, blah 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 blah. But to be honest with you, many of the other FF cars in this game with an absurd amount of horsepower definitely struggle in the traction area, but not this bad. At least that immense amount of power is not as detrimental to those other cars' lap time as it is to the Hyundai Elantra N. It seems like there's just no way to get this car to hook up, and using higher gears doesn't really help either, as the car doesn't have a significant amount of torque to be able to pull the car out of the corner. In terms of the mid-corner balance and the general handling, the car has access to plenty of downforce, more importantly 200 front downforce, which is going to give the car a lot of rotation in the mid to high speed corners, which if you do drive this car, it does have a lot of rotation in those types of corners. But for a car with 64% of its weight in the front, I would have expected it to put down the power a little bit better than it does. I do think the modern Civics, as well as like the older Integras, actually do a much better job managing the horsepower than this car, and for their performance points will perform a little bit better. Now, FF cars in general are not very good for performance points racing, or just in general in this game at this point. After the 1.31 physics update, the front end grip of cars was reduced significantly. The FF cars took a massive hit in that particular update, but this car for 740 pp is just simply not cutting it. If you want to drive this car effectively, I would say to steer clear of tracks that have a lot of low speed corners and traction acceleration zones. Nürburgring Nordschleife actually might be a good candidate for this car. A few other quirks with this car is obviously the fact that it bottoms out, which is the most common problem I've seen people have on Reddit as well as other social media platforms, is the fact that this car has to be raised significantly to avoid bottoming out. Now, on my setup screenshot, I have the front ride height at 110, and I felt like that was the absolute minimum I could put it before the car would start bottoming bottoming out. On some tracks, you may want to actually raise it even more because there are certain situations where the car can still bottom out at 110, but generally speaking, you want to get this car as low as possible without bottoming out. Now, I made a whole entire video on how to avoid bottoming out, but this setup here should do the job on most tracks. It definitely has a bit of entry oversteer, which is something I like on FF cars, with the rear downforce at 175. And interestingly, the damping ratio, compression, and expansion are actually different values than what you would typically get on any other road cars. The only other cars to have differing damping, compression, and expansion ratios are typically the Group B rally cars, but for some reason this gets different percentage values as well, which on the expansion in particular I promptly took advantage of because higher expansion in this game usually just means faster. Yeah, I know I've been talking about this car for a while. It's a bit of a disappointment for me, but I know some people will still get some decent value out of it. The next car I want to talk about, which is ironically almost the exact same performance points as my build on the Elantra, is the Toyota Land Cruiser FJ40V with the LS7 Rampage engine swap. Now, this was a car that I initially had drove on the controller just to give it a little test run. Keep in mind, I'm not really the best at driving on the controller because I usually never race on the controller, and I didn't really have too many issues controlling it. However, when I tried that exact same setup that I was using at the beginning on the wheel, it was undrivable and I literally couldn't control it. But I did take some time and I tweaked the car a bunch. I lowered the front roll bar, which helped the car stay under control under heavy braking a little bit more than it was before, and I was able to adjust the differential and the torque distribution to counter any of the negative side effects of the lower roll bar. For a sub 740 pp car, unlike the Elantra, this car puts down very respectable lap times. I do think you could run this car in 750 pp lobbies and remain relatively competitive depending on the track. I do think the overall downfall of this car for a lot of drivers is going to be the stability when changing directions or braking heavily into corners. I find when I'm entering corners, I want to stay a gear higher than I normally would in most normal cars, because getting increased engine braking from a lower gear actually seems to make the car way more unstable. So I like to let the car settle into the corner first, then grab that extra downshift to power out. And the other downside is, despite the fact this vehicle gets 1100 horsepower from the Rampage engine, the drag wall that it hits in medium to high speed situations is so immense that it really doesn't actually feel all that fast in a straight line after you hit about 130 miles per hour. This is very reminiscent of the Willys Jeep engine swap as well, where the car has a lot of power initially and picks up quickly, but the drag ends up slowing it down enough to where it's actually not all that impressive in a straight line, especially near the end of the straight in a top speed zone, which ironically makes this very large Land Cruiser vehicle very good for some of the more autocrossy, short straightaway acceleration type track, which suits the four-wheel drive and the 50-50 weight distribution very well. And this car, I would say, is a net positive and a pleasant surprise overall in this update. I wasn't expecting it to perform this well, and I think for its performance points rating, it's actually quite solid. And the last new addition in this update is the Toyota RAV4 Adventure. And while I consistently complain about SUVs being added to this game, this is simply the best SUV that they've added in an update so far. It has access to 414 horsepower, which is a lot more power than all of the other SUVs that they've added recently. I could comfortably say it has the best handling balance of any SUV since the Audi Pikes Peak Quattro concept from Gran Turismo 6. If they do eventually decide to add an engine swap for this vehicle, I do think it would be able to compete with the Lamborghini Urus for the best SUV in this game. And for 675 pp, the performance honestly is not bad. I'm not going to say it's a standout at that performance points range. It's really not all that impressive in a straight line for that pp, but I do think it'll be useful for some single player events in the lower pp ranges as well. And this outstanding performance is in spite of the fact that this car bottoms out worse than almost any vehicle in this game. I had to raise the ride heights to 165 to avoid it from bottoming out at Trowel Mound, which is an obscenely high value. It hasn't seemed to affect the RAV4 nearly as much as I expected it to. I just find it extremely bizarre that these cars are bottoming out the way they are, especially SUVs. And for that reason, I would say definitely avoid running the wide offset on the RAV4, as this will allow you to run a lower ride height than you otherwise could with the wide offset. Yeah, RAV4, awesome. And the bonus car that I wanted to throw in this video was the Toyota GR Corolla, which is a car that I had actually never driven before this update came out, but it actually ended up getting the Dodge Demon Challenger engine, which has a max output of 1186 horsepower. Now, the first thing I noticed as soon as I swapped this car, that this car benefits from the broken performance points exploit that basically causes many cars to have a way lower performance points than they otherwise should have. So while it's 766 pp, I'm effectively looking at this car as if it's an 800 pp car. That's about where I think it would be had this performance points glitch not been a thing. If you do look at it in that 800 pp sphere. It's capable of a 139.9 trowel mountain. That was at least the best time I was able to get within a decent amount of time lapping, and that puts it right up there with the R34Z tune. It puts it right up there with that Mitsubishi Evo with the LS7 BRZ engine. It would be insanely fast for a sub 800 pp car, never mind a 766 BP car. It's definitely a little bit tricky to drive considering it only has access to 270 downforce in the back. If you have a good diff setting as well as a very stiff suspension setup with the ride heights raised once again due to bottoming out, this car absolutely rips around almost any track, and it's extremely fun and nimble to drive. Now, a lot of people are logically going to ask, what about this same swap in the Yaris? And the Yaris, unfortunately due to no fault of its own, doesn't have access to the same amount of downforce as the Corolla does. 100 less downforce on the front and the rear, which makes a massive difference. So I would definitely opt into the Corolla before I opted into the Yaris. But I'm definitely going to be driving this car a lot moving forward, so I hope you guys enjoy this setup. Well, and that's it for the builds today, guys. Overall, the update to me was pretty mid once again. I'm not going to be going as hard on this update as I did on the last one, because I do think this update is marginally better than 1.62. But once again, I don't think actually anyone really cares because of the December announcement with Spec 3. If you do want to see the patch notes for that upcoming Spec 3 update, I made a community post detailing all the changes coming to Gran Turismo 7. So if you do want to check that out, that'll be up on my community post section of my channel. And if you guys did enjoy these setups and or the video, leaving a like, comment, and subscribing greatly helps me out. I really appreciate all the support, guys, once again. But without letting this video drag on too long, I hope you guys have a good night. It's been your boy Dude, and I'm out. Peace.